Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I assume Undersecretary Connor, you are available as we probe into the intricacies of the budget here, so appreciate your being here as well. Secretary, I have a number of questions that are related to this revised comprehensive conservation plan and then the final EIS for the ANWR area, the Arctic National Wildlife Region. More questions than we got time for here in this committee, so I'm going to be asking a number of these questions about the plan and the FEIS. For the record, I'll be inquiring about when they were initiated, who worked on them. I think it is important that folks understand how this plan came to be and the thinking behind it. So I would just ask for your cooperation and that of the Department in receiving thorough and complete and prompt answers to these areas of inquiry. You mentioned your visit to Kivalina a couple weeks ago. I appreciate the fact that you not only went to see Kivalina, but that you met with not only our Native leadership at their winter retreat, but also with the governor, the leadership in the House and the Senate, and the entire Alaska congressional delegation on issues that are of concern to us. You mentioned the funding in the budget that is available to help tribes and coastal communities. And when you were in Alaska, you mentioned that there was $8 million that could be made available by way of grants. I visited with the folks from the Northwest Arctic Borough region just yesterday in my office, and I asked them about accessing any of these funds that were available, and they described the offer as almost laughable, that in fact half of this $8 million in grants would not be made available to them, that when you're looking to build an evacuation route or in many cases move a community, the costs that are associated are in the realm of $100 to $120 million for the community of Kivalina. And of course, we know that Kivalina is just one of many. And so they asked me to ask you this morning, what is your proposal, having seen Kivalina and the situation that community faces, what is your proposal to help address their immediate needs for an emergency evacuation route?
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I, too, had an opportunity to drop in on a meeting with our friends from Northwest Alaska. The $8 million in the 2015 budget is intended to support tribal programs around resilience. It certainly never had an intent to relocate villages, but we have, since my visit to Kivalina, already visited with OMB, looking at potential areas in the budget where we might be able to move relatively quickly, not just for Kivalina, but many of the other coastal communities that are threatened. So, the first step is planning and understanding options. And I certainly got some very helpful insights when I was in Kivalina about, the decisions that the village itself is facing and what it wants to do. So there is certainly not enough money in the 16 budget and the 15 budget to do any major changes. That would require probably subsequent legislation. But I think working alongside the state, understanding what other federal resources we can bring to bear, which we are currently investigating right now, is a good step forward to trying to figure out these very difficult situations that your state faces.
Well, I think you would probably agree that we need a full-on action plan because, again, it's not just Kivalina we're talking about. And as our governor has reminded you, with a $3.5 billion hole in our budget, and the price of oil not looking like it's going to increase in the near term, and production only going down, that's a concern for us, how we deal with that state share. Let me speak just a moment here to the situation with Shell and their plans to drill in the Chukchi this summer for the first time since 2012. This is good news for us. Particularly at a time that the price of oil is causing companies to really scrutinize their investment decisions on very large-scale projects. And so it makes it all the more important that Shell have the certainty that it needs before it proceeds to spend even yet more billions of dollars. It needs to retain its existing lease portfolio to warrant this enormous investment. And the difficulty, I think you know this, is that Shell's leases were issued back in 2008. They're all scheduled to expire in 2020. And because of this very short window, a 75-day Arctic drilling season, and the difficulties and the delays and the legal challenges that are all out there that Shell has endured for the past decade, there really are not enough drilling seasons remaining for Shell to complete more than a handful of exploration wells before the Chukchi lease portfolio expires. So the question to you, they have requested a suspension of operations, and the application that Shell has presented has explained that this suspension is warranted because of these delays, because of the challenging environment that they operate in, and they're waiting for a little bit of certainty here. I'm told that in the Gulf, suspensions of operations are handled pretty routinely, pretty perfunctorily. They take a few months for a response. I understand absolutely that we've got different issues in the Arctic. I appreciate that. But it's been 8 months now. The question is whether or not you can give me some certainty as to when Shell will receive an answer in response to its suspension of operations request.
Senator, we are actively working with Shell and other leaseholders up there on their request for suspensions. Our team has been working very, very hard to address the supplemental EIS that was required of us by the courts to support Shell's activities potentially this summer. So the team focused on that, and the leases were suspended during the time that court order was in place. As we have now released draft standards for the Arctic, and those are going through public review, we're continuing to work with Shell for this drilling season, and the team is focusing a lot of attention on the requests for suspension. So we will be resolving that relatively soon. We understand the circumstances the companies have. We also understand the circumstances that Shell had in 2012. You know, we get that it's complicated to do work up there. We want to make sure it's done safely and responsibly, and we want to be responsive to the companies.
But you agree that it has taken 8 months is not a reasonable time period. Would you agree?
Well, I don't know what a reasonable time period is, honestly. It's very complicated up there. I do know that we took our resources and focused them, as we were requested to do, on helping Shell move forward for this drilling season. I also know that we are actively working with them on suspensions, and I think they can expect an answer in the relatively near future.
But I think you also would agree, as a business person and one who looks longer term, that it's difficult for any company to make the kinds of investment, the sizable investment that Shell will, without the certainty as to whether or not you're going to have these leases. So I would appreciate it, and I think not only Shell but others who are looking to advance operations in the offshore would appreciate some expediency on these requests for suspension. So I appreciate that.